know why this suddenly happened. Were the writers actively trying to be more progressive? Or was it a response to some potential criticism the show got from season 1? So the show actually introduced these elements in order to mock them. Because often the sexism issues seem to be played up for laughs. And just listen to this musical cue we get when we see Mrs. Clamp enter in her maid's outfit.
Hi, Mom. Are you okay? You look like a maid.
Uh-huh. Or maybe they just wanted to get away with using the word sex in a kid's show.
Oh, Celeste, I think she says are sexist. Lisa said a dirty word.
And finally, you just have really badly written episodes in general. Example 1. Lucian finds what he believes is a super rare egg, and now everyone is after it. Turns out the egg wasn't actually super rare, and was in fact just a regular egg that got dirty. Even though the egg was cleaned earlier that episode, and was even recognized as being clean from the character to clean.
23.
Very, very
9. 8.
Another episode features Mr. Winkle intentionally releasing
14.
pit lice so he can sell more shampoo. He does
22.
this by making all the students wear a lice-infected
5.
suit. All that is, except his daughter Wendy.
18.
At the end of the episode, all the kids seem to have
18.
their hair singed off to kill the lice.
7.
That is except for Wendy, who is gloating.
11.
Small breeze then enters the classroom,
14.
and somehow manages to blow her entirely.
2.
But those episodes
12.
have nothing on these next three.
3.
Spit Collector, for example,
0.
involves Wayne collecting all the spit from the townsfolk so he can fake a saliva test. Most of this episode is just plain gross, with Wayne even using the spit for hair gel and bubble gum, eventually putting all the spit into one bucket and then consuming it. Quality stuff. There's the episode Wendy House, where Wendy really amps up the stalk factor on Wayne, basically setting up a house right next to his bedroom.
Gas
Where
is
she spies
inbound.
on him
Marking
getting
new
naked,
safe zone.
sneaks into his room at night to sexually assault him, and even watches him while he sleeps, where she's dedicated an entire love tunnel for him. What the fuck? Seriously, she even makes Helga from Hey Arnold look terrible. This, of course, is all played up for laughs, and even when she is discovered, there's no punishment for her whatsoever.
I feel violated.
And finally, there's my least favourite episode of the show, Wendy, in which Wendy is a completely unlikable spoiled brat. Now I'll admit, even in season 1, Wendy was probably my least favourite character, but even then there were times where she would have legitimate funny moments.
Oops, I ruined it.
And though for the most part she was a spoiled brat, her parents would stand up to her if she was pushing it too far.
But we can't blow up the swamp.
I'll scream.
I said no.
But of course, in season 2, this is nowhere to be seen. And this episode highlights that the most. Wendy decides that she wants to be a fashion designer, and so starts designing all these ludicrous outfits for the people of Soap City, which begins to lead to all sorts of health and safety accidents. She also designs the outfits for her fellow classmates, which of course includes Wayne, who is put in a really questionable outfit, which also happens to expose his eyes. And considering he's meant to be around the age of 10 years old, this just feels really off. Especially when in order to get him to wear the outfit, 2 grown men had to kidnap him in the park and strip him naked. Yeah, eventually the townspeople start protesting Wendy's fashion, where she plays herself the victim. And the episode ends with her then humiliating her parents, to which she receives no punishment whatsoever. So yeah, in conclusion, if you were to ask me what I thought of the Cramp Twins, my answer would be depending on what season. Season 1, I'll admit, is no masterpiece and will accept the flaws people have with it, but I wouldn't say it was awful, and I still think it has charm and can make for an enjoyable watch. Season 2, however, yeah, I really can't defend that one. Not every episode in season 2 is bad, some are actually okay, but when it sucks, it really sucks. If you haven't yet seen the show or want to give it a second chance, I'd recommend checking out these episodes to start you off, as these are the ones that I feel are the strongest, or the ones that I just enjoyed the most. And at the moment, most of the episodes seem to be freely available on YouTube, so why not? And until the next one, take care.
Sure do.
The Pied Piper of Hamelin. I'm sure most of you are aware of this classic fairy tale. It's the story of a town named Hamelin which has become overrun by a rat infestation, where the rats would eat all the food and spread disease throughout the town. The townspeople tried all sorts of methods to combat the rats, but all were ineffective. Suddenly, a stranger would appear from over the hills and claim that he would be able to get rid of the rats if the town agreed to pay him. The stranger, of course, being the Pied Piper, who, using his whimsical pipe, would start playing a tune, which not only attracted the rats to him, but would also cause them to follow his whereabouts. The Piper would lead the rats out of town and free the people from their epidemic. However, when it came to paying the Piper, the town decided that since the rats were now gone, there was no need to pay him anymore, and so they refused. The Piper, enraged by this, begins to play his pipe once again, only this time, instead of attracting rats, it's the town's children that follow the music. And so just like he did with the rats, the Piper leads the children out of town. The townspeople realize the error of their ways, and finally agree to pay the Piper, where the children are then reunited with their parents, and all is good and happy. It's a fairly simple story, and is often told to children to teach them the moral of what will happen if you become selfish or lie. And then we have this film. Yes, The Pied Piper from 1986, originally titled Kaisar, which translates to The Rat Catcher. The film is a stop-motion adaptation of the original fairy tale, produced in Czechoslovakia and directed by Jiří Bárta. This isn't actually the first time we've covered the work of Jiří Bárta, as a short while ago I reviewed his 2009 film, Toys in the Attic, which, despite being a film intended for kids, was riddled with creepy imagery such as this. And this was Jiří Bárta when he was trying to make more of a family film. The Pied Piper, however, was intended for a more mature audience, and boy does it take advantage of that. We get murder, blood, creepy imagery, and of course, some rape. Boy, what a great way to kick off the new year. So let's take a look at The Pied Piper. But first, a quick shout out to this video's sponsor, Ridge Wallet, with its light, sleek, and industrial design that doesn't awkwardly bulge in your pocket.
But tell me, Eddie, is that
Wallet
in your pocket or you just happy to see me?
You can certainly see the size difference from my old wallet. There's over 30 colors and styles to choose from, including burnt titanium and carbon fiber, which is the one I personally went for. Ridge Wallet comes with a lifetime warranty, plus a 45-day free trial, so if for whatever reason you're not satisfied with your purchase, you can send it back and get a full refund. Just head on over to ridge.com/SteveReviews and use the code SteveReviews to get 10% off today, plus free shipping and returns. Thank you so much, guys. Now back to the review. Right from the opening, you can tell this isn't going to be your classic child-friendly fairy tale. The impending music coupled with the heartbeat-like clock sounds, the dreary aesthetic, and the stylistic designs. We're introduced to the town of Hamlin, set during the Middle Ages. The first thing you're going to notice is the warped design of the town and its residents. The skewed design is actually meant to be inspired by German Expressionism, a creative movement which became popular in Germany during the 1910s to 1930s, offering a more expressive and anti-realistic view of the world. Basically, it was the Tim Burton before Tim Burton. Jiri Barta stated that in his adaptation, he wanted to capture more of the German spirit, which, let's see, dreary, humorless, yet efficient citizens. Yeah, that seems to be capturing the German spirit. The style also extends into the human characters themselves, who were given abstract and mechanical-like designs.
There are 50 still active. Good hunting.
This is in contrast to the rats, who have a more realistic appearance and even feature some live-action shots. This, according to Jiri Barta, was done intentionally to give the idea that the rats were more alive than the humans. Which is what we see in the opening scenes of this film, as we draw parallels between the day-to-day lives of the human characters to the mechanics of a ticking clock. Not only showing the mundane and restricted lifestyles they lead, but maybe also highlighting how they are a slave to time itself. I mean, as we saw in the film Toys in the Attic, Jiri Barta does seem to have a beef against clocks. It's also worth noting that there's no dialogue in this film, as all the characters will communicate in sim-like mumblings. Perhaps again, another intentional choice to make the human characters come across as, well, less human. And yeah, right off the bat we are shown that we are not meant to root for these characters, as we see that they are selfish and malicious, with greed and desire for material wealth. Because as we know, people are arseholes. We then see the town's council, who in contrast to the citizens who are freaking out about the cost of a bag of flour, the town's leaders live a life of luxury, so much so that they can afford to be as wasteful as they please, and end up throwing food everywhere, which of course the rats take full advantage of. All this excessive food leads to the rats increasing in numbers, and becoming more bold and aggressive. And that's when our hero of the film turns up, the Pied Piper, who, oh wow, he looks just as terrifying and menacing as the people. This is the hero, right? Normally the Pied Piper is depicted as the colourful and joyful persona, sort of having a jester-like appearance. But here he looks less of a jester and more of a Jedi, kind of like a pissed off Anakin Skywalker. Must have been from all that sand he encountered in the desert.
I don't like sand. It's coarse, rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere.
The Piper approaches the town council and demonstrates his ability to lure the rats away with his magical pipe. The town leaders are impressed by his actions and agree to pay him 1,000 gold coins. The Pied Piper agrees and heads out into the town to begin leading the rats away. Meanwhile, there's this weird subplot going on where this creepy guy is trying to woo a young woman by offering her a gold ring. But unlike the rest of the townspeople who are driven by material wealth, she is not interested. What she does appear to be interested in, however, is the Pied Piper. For reasons I'm not entirely sure why. I mean, yeah, creepy hooded old guy that has a bunch of diseased rats following him, that's ticking all the boxes. Or maybe it's just the fact that he can play a fine tune. No wonder so many guys like to bring their guitars
Gas
along
is
to
moving
parties.
in. New safe zone located.
The Piper leads the rats to the top of the city wall and has the rats run off the edge, where they brutally drown in the water below.
Hold out, drop heading your
Christ,
way.
that seems a bit harsh. I mean, I know they're rats and they're meant to be gross and all, but they're just trying to live their lives too, you know? I remember when I heard about this story as a kid, we were always told that the rats were simply lured into the woods where they could live their lives in peace away from humans. But it seems I was pretty sheltered in that regard, as even in most of the kid-friendly versions, the story does indeed say, the rat will led to the river and drown.
We lost
I
that
guess
one,
even
but come
fairy
back
tales
stronger
don't
next
like
time.
that.
In no
Only 25
time,
left. Pick up
all
the
the
revolver.
rats, mesmerized by his tune, fell into the river and drowned.
Ah, yes.
Diseased cretins. I mean, Christ, this last little rat doesn't even want to jump. It even looks up to the Piper as if to say, please don't make me do this. To which the Piper just amplifies his tune, and the poor little guy is forced to go anyway. Oh, you know what? Maybe I'd be better off in the river after all. Satisfied with his rat genocide, the Piper heads back into town, where he and the young woman sit together as he plays her some more fine tunes. What you did with those awful rats was so totally hot. Tell me, does that magical pipe of yours also happen to work on Jews? Capturing the German spirit. He then heads to the town council to receive his payment, but they, of course, refuse to pay him. This enrages the Pied Piper so damn much that he decides to simply walk away. Okay? But here's where the film really starts to get darker. So we cut back to the young woman asleep in her bed, when suddenly the creepy guy turns up intoxicated, trying once more to win her over with his offerings. She once again politely refuses. We then get a truly horror-like scene as the guy attacks her, and although we don't actually see it, it is implied that the three men rape and murder her. All this whilst coupled with the distorted music, flickering lighting, and warped imagery, makes it a truly uncomforting scene to watch. The Pied Piper returns to the house shortly after, where he finds her murdered body. Enraged even further, the Piper marches to the town's clock tower, where he begins to play another tune. Now, in the original tale, this tune would cause the children to follow the Piper just as the rats did. And depending on which version you were told, the children were either returned once the Piper got his money, or were just never heard from again. In this version, however, it goes a little darker, as the tune lures the town folks out of their home and begins turning them into rats. In what is actually some pretty creepy
Enemy soldier
moments.
incoming. Playtime's over, mate. You're going to the water.
The new ratified townspeople, don't think that's a word, well, you know it is, begin to follow the Piper as he parades through the town. And just like the fate that besieges the rats before, the Piper leads them to the city walls, where he makes them plunge off the edge, where we hear their frantic cries for help as they drown in the water below. So glad I decided to review this. Only one person is left surviving, and that's an old fisherman who'd been watching the Piper from afar. The fisherman approaches the Piper, but before anything can be said, the Piper disappears, leaving only his cape, which blows off into the wind. Fuck you, sand. Try getting in my shoes now. The fisherman ventures into the abandoned town, where he hears the faint cries of a baby. The fisherman takes the child and leaves the town on what appears to be a painting visual of some sort, where the film ends and the credits roll. And that's Jiri's Barter, the Pied Piper. Certainly an interesting adaptation from the classic fairy tale, some of which I think works better, and other parts not so much. The first half of the film does suffer from a slow pace. As we're looking into the lives of the town's citizens, the Piper himself doesn't actually show up until around the halfway mark. I do prefer this film's take on the Piper's revenge, where he turns the citizens into the very rats that they despise and look down upon, as it seems like a more fitting fate for them, and is something that punishes them directly. I always thought the original tale of having the Piper take the kids away was a bit unfair on the children, who didn't really do anything to deserve it. However, in order to justify this harsher punishment, they throw in a romantic subplot with the Piper and the young woman. so that when she's killed, it gives him more motive to carry out revenge. Which, yeah, I agree with, as turning the entire town into rats because the wealthy elite ripped him off would be a little unjustified. But the love plot really feels tacked on, and kind of out of place, especially considering he's meant to be some sort of spiritual being. As for the animation, well, the stop motion is okay. It certainly isn't the most fluid out there and isn't too ambitious with the cinematography, but there are moments where it does have nice visuals, such as the dramatic lighting and the creative way to convey dialogue. I also quite like this little jump cut here where you're about to have the cow's head chopped and suddenly we cut to a jug of red wine being filled. One issue I must point out though is that the colour palette is lacking, which gives the film a very dark and dreary look, which causes the characters on screen to blend too much with the background. If you want to see how this is done better, I'd say go take a look at Coraline, where the gloomy backgrounds are contrasted by Coraline's bright colours, making her pop out. And it's also done to make the real world distinguish to the alternative universe, which offers a much more vibrant colour scheme. The film does try to do this, as we have the young innocent woman who's portrayed in a more colourful palette, probably to show her innocence in this bitter world. But she only appears in a couple of scenes, so for the vast majority you are stuck with the dull, dreary palette. For the music, I do quite like the musical score. The flute-like theme is obviously tied nicely with the Pied Piper story, and I did love the dark electric guitar that was used to represent the Piper's anger. Overall, I did quite enjoy this adaptation. It's only 50 minutes long and is currently available to watch on YouTube. So if you like stop motion, mixed with a dark tone and stylistic design, then I think you'll find this to be a tune that's playing on your wavelength.
Hey fellas, you got room for one more bag? Sure, Mrs. Dinkle, hop in.
Going off from our last review with Paddock, where the film was marketing itself towards a family audience, despite being very far from family friendly, Mary and Max on surface level also seems to be potentially family friendly. Upbeat music, a child character as the main focus, and even a jolly narrator who is very reminiscent of the narrators you'd get in the old school kids shows.
She adored the Noblets because everyone was brown.
Oh no, shouted Rabbit. Duck! And they all ducked. Except Duck, who was wondering why Rabbit was shouting.
But of course, being a film that's been recommended to me multiple times, it is definitely not going to be a kids' film. There are a lot of mature elements in this film throughout, and not subtle ones either. Bundled in with some incredibly dark moments too. Like, we're talking dark. The film was produced in Australia and released in 2009, written and directed by Adam Elliott. The film's plot revolves around two unlikely pen pals from across the world. Mary, an 8-year-old girl living in Australia, and Max, a 44-year-old man living in America. Funny enough, the events that we see in this film are actually based on real-life events from the director himself, which, for the sake of spoilers, I won't get into until nearer the end of the video. So, let's take a look at the critically acclaimed film, Mary and Max. The film opens up in a town called Mount Waverley, set in Australia 1976. Here we get introduced to an 8-year-old girl called Mary Daisy Dinkle.
Mary Dinkle's eyes were the colour of muddy puddles. Her birthmark, the colour of poo.
Unfortunately for Mary, her life at home isn't all too great. We see that the family doesn't have much money, as Mary has to make her own toys. And one of the reasons for this may be the fact that her mother is an alcoholic. Plus also the fact that her dad seems to have a low-skilled job working in a tea factory.
He could get as many free tea bags as he wanted.
But actually, I take it back. As a British person, that job sounds amazing. Mary's parents don't seem to have much time for her. Her father spends much of his home time in the shed pursuing his hobby of stuffing birds. Hey, everyone needs a hobby. And her mother is always busy testing the tea, as she puts it.
He told Mary it was a type of tea for grown-ups that needed constant testing.
God, it's like a less subtle version of Helga's mum.
That needed constant testing.
God, it's like a less subtle version of Helga's mum from Hey Arnold. And on top of all that, it seems her parents never planned to have her in the first place.
Her mother had told her she was an accident. How could someone be an accident?
Don't worry, Professor. I was an accident too.
Despite her life being far from perfect, Mary still tries to remain happy and optimistic. And this is reflected in the upbeat piano music we hear playing in the background, along with the enthusiastic narration being told over the top.
Mary stopped daydreaming and went and fetched her pet rooster from the rain.
The narrator is voiced by Barry Humphries, who I think does a terrific job. Which, if it wasn't for all the mature visuals going on in the background, you would think you were actually watching a children's TV show. We then cut to America in New York City, where the soft, warm sepia tone of Australia has been replaced by a more contrasting black and white, and the light-hearted piano music replaced with a slower, almost kind of distorted tune. Here we get introduced to our other main character, Max, a 44-year-old man who lives alone in his New York apartment, possessing a dashing pair of Shrek-like ears. Max enjoys chocolate hot dogs, having logic and order in his life, and watching his favourite cartoon show, The Noblets. What kind of grown adult still watches children's cartoons? What you will notice after being introduced to these two characters is just how much the film changes in order to reflect their personalities. Mary's world is a soft brown, with upbeat music and an inquisitive narration to reflect her childhood innocence. Whereas Max's world is darker, the music slower, and the narration, though keeping the same tone, does tend to focus much more on precise numbers when describing Max's life.
It was the 6th fly he'd caught this evening. It had been 6 hours and 12 minutes since Henry VIII had passed away.
Which will become more apparent as to why as the film goes on. We cut back to Mary and her mother who are out shopping, and while sat waiting for her mum to finish borrowing stuff, Mary looks through her New York phone book and decides it would be fun to write a letter to a random person in America. And wouldn't you know it, the random person she selects just happens to be Max. Later that night, Mary gets on writing her letter. She talks about her life, her favourite things, and poses the question of where do babies live? Also, credit to the voice actress of Mary, as I think she does a fantastic job portraying the innocent and inquisitive nature of Mary.
My favorite color is brown, and my favorite food is sweetened condensed milk.
As the letter reaches Max, we get more of an insight into his lifestyle, seeing that he suffers from obesity, doesn't do too well romantically, and finds a lot of the world confusing.
And then he did what he normally did whenever confronted with something new and stressful.
Yep, I feel your pain, Max. After giving it much thought, Max finally decides to write back to Mary in what is a great little musical sequence. In his letter, we learn that Max has seen a psychiatrist to help with his anxiety and obesity, no doubt brought on from his less than favourable childhood.
She shot herself with my uncle's gun when I was 6.
Oh my!
We also learn other things such as his previous job roles, his religious backgrounds, how he was once sectioned, and how he obsesses over cleaning up cigarette butts to prevent them from getting into the ocean.
Butts are bad because they wash out to sea and fish smoke them and become nicotine dependent.
Whoever sent this obviously has no idea about the physical limitations of what's in the water. No, might as well throw these in the fire.
And of course, we get an answer to that ever important question of where did babies come from.
If you are Jewish, they're laid by Catholic nuns. If you're an atheist, they're laid by dirty, lonely prostitutes.
Again, credit has to be given to the voice actor playing Max, Philip Hoffman, who does an absolutely fantastic job. Who sadly 5 years after this film came out, died of a drug overdose in his apartment. Mary's mother discovers the letter from Max and isn't too pleased with the idea of her daughter writing to a middle-aged man from across the world, and so throws the letter out into the rubbish. Which, to be fair, I can actually kind of understand her concerns, especially considering some of the things written in the letter. And I will be completely honest here, when people told me about the basic plot of this film and just how dark it gets, I was starting to get worried that it could go down a certain kind of dark path. But I will just get it out
Boo banana bus, boo banana.
of the way now. It doesn't, so we can all breathe easy at least on that front. By pure chance, Mary manages to find the letter her mum threw out, and so continues writing to Max in secret. We find out more about how Mary's life isn't so great outside of the house either, as she is bullied by the other kids at school.
Yesterday at school, Bernie Clifford weed on my spam sandwich.
Honestly, Mary, if the spam in Australia is anything like the spam in the UK, that kid did you a favour. She is also teased about her birthmark on her forehead, how she doesn't have proper buttons on her coat, and even criticised by her teacher for not smiling enough. We also start to learn more about Max, including at how he feels lonely in life, his struggle with finding love, and how he recently got diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome.
Why are there hamburgers in your underwear?
Oh my god! You're saying I have Asperger's?
Which includes him taking things too literally, and having trouble recognising facial expressions. Despite these difficulties though, Max doesn't see himself as having a problem, and doesn't like the idea of people saying that he needs to be cured.
I do not feel disabled, defective, or a need to be cured. I like being an Aspie.
Mary and Max's friendship grows over the years
Yeah,
as they
just
continue
Asperger's.
to write to each other. And whereas
are a
Max
big
is
brain.
comfortable with himself, Mary is
I'm
not,
not.
and uses the money she had saved up to one day visit Max to instead have cosmetic surgery to remove the birthmark from her head. Things still don't go too great for Mary though, as she still embarrasses herself in front of her love interest, and also has both her parents die.
Oh my!
But where God closes a door, a window is also opened, and Mary ends up getting married to her long-found love interest and begins to succeed academically, where in honour of her pen pal Max, she devotes her life in trying to find a cure for Asperger's syndrome, using Max as her case study. Her research is praised by her professors, and even led to her publishing her own book. Thrilled at her achievements, Mary excitedly sends a copy of the books over to Max, in hope that he will be proud of what she's accomplished, stating that she will also give him half of the royalties, and plans on visiting him next week. Max, however, doesn't return the enthusiasm, not liking the idea that his condition is seen as a disease that needs to be cured. Emotionally outraged with feelings of betrayal, Max is unable to put his emotions into words, and so sends Mary a single item in the post. That item being the letter M from his typewriter, symbolising the end of their friendship. Now, this is where things begin to get really dark. Distraught by Max's response to her book, Mary realizes the error of her ways, and not only goes about destroying her literature, but also ends up turning to alcohol, soon becoming an apparition of her own mother. In an attempt to heal wounds, Mary sends Max a can of condensed milk with the words "I'm sorry" written on the side. Unfortunately though, she doesn't hear anything back, causing her life to spiral into further turmoil, eventually leading to her husband leaving her. This then gives us what I would argue to be the darkest scene in the film, as Mary is in her living room, heavily intoxicated, barely able to stand, and getting ready to take an overdose to then hang herself. Holy shit. But the thing about this scene, despite how dark it is that it's absolutely fantastic and probably my favourite scene in the entire film. As Mary takes the pills, we see the room melt around her as she carefree dances in her last moments of life. The way the camera pans around her whilst images of her past are showcased is basically showing her life flashing before her eyes, and the way she stares up towards the living room light, a visual representation of her stepping into the light, is absolutely brilliant. All the while we have this beautiful rendition of Que Sera Sera playing in the background. Oh, and just to add on top of all that, she's also pregnant. Yeah, because this scene wasn't dark enough already. But just before it's too late, there is a knock at the door, and a neighbour presents her a parcel that was left outside. The parcel, of course, being from Max, who, along with a gift of his Noblet collection, states in a letter that he forgives her, in what is actually a very heartwarming speech.
You are my best friend. You are my only friend.
So, Mary is saved, their friendship is restored, so all is good and happy, right? Well, not quite. So 1 year passes, and Mary has finally gotten round to visiting Max in New York, along with her newly born child. After all these years of waiting, and after numerous delays and obstacles, she finally gets to meet her lifelong pen pal in the flesh. But unfortunately, it seems that Max had passed away that very morning. Good lord, this scene hits like a brick. Mary's reaction, plus the music that plays over the top, is just gut-wrenching. But despite the immediate sadness, it's actually a very bittersweet moment. As Mary looks round, she sees all of the items Max has collected of their friendship over the years, showing the value it had on him. And in the final shot, we get a look up towards the ceiling, where we see Max had kept all the letters that Mary had sent to him, which he had stared at in his final moments of life, where he just sat there and smiled. And that was Mary and Max. Boy, what an emotional roller coaster. It has a lot of low-grade toilet humour and ball-kicking jokes that I was on. Ronald the Barbarian is a Dutch CGI animated film that released in September 2011. It was produced by Einstein Film and had a total of 3 directors, whom I'm going to do my best to not botch their names. Preston Vestbjerg Andersen, Torbjørn Kristoffersen, and Philip Einstein Lipski. I can already hear the comments typing now. The title itself is a direct reference to the 1982 film Conan the Barbarian. Philip Einstein Lipski. I can already hear the comments typing now. The title itself is a direct reference to the 1982 film Conan the Barbarian, but I must admit, when I first heard the name of it, I just automatically thought of the old Saturday morning cartoon Dave the Barbarian, which is a show I really must get round to reviewing at some point.
Twinkle, my flying steed! I'm sorry I haven't visited you for a while.
I've been so lonely in here. Such terrible thoughts one has, alone, in the dark.
Unlike Dave the Barbarian, which was primarily aimed at a younger audience, this film is definitely not a kids' film, despite how it may appear on surface level, and even how it's tagged as one on YouTube. Don't be fooled, this film has violence, gore, sexual moments, swearing, and of course, a lot of bull jokes. No, seriously, there's even an entire segment of the film which quite literally features a floating ball sack. I can already imagine the amount of parents that would stumble across this film thinking it's a free and easy watch for little Timmy, and then popping back an hour later and seeing something like this.
I'm about to lose control! Take me! Take me hard!
Sadly for the film, however, it turned out to be a box office bomb, releasing into Danish cinemas and only making around $2 million, not even making a return on its $3 million budget. And those few that did see it didn't seem to rate it too highly either, with IMDb currently rating the film as 6.6 out of 10 and a Rotten Tomatoes audience score of just 53%. Is the film deserving of this failure? Well, let's venture in and take a look. Here's a conversation topic for parties. Did you know that 2 out of 3 guys would experience some form of male pattern baldness by the time they're 35? And the problem is, once hair is gone, it's very difficult to get back. So that's why it's key to do something to prevent it from falling out in the first place. Keeps is a subscription service that provides advice and treatment on hair loss in men. With Keeps, you will have a licensed doctor review your information and provide the best hair loss treatment plan for you. Your treatment is shipped directly to you every 3 months. And there's 24/7 help and support should you have any questions along the way. But remember, the treatment typically takes between 4 to 6 months to take effect, so you want to act now before you notice the hair falling out. If you're ready to take action and prevent hair loss, go to keeps.com/Steve Reviews, or click the link in the description to get 50% off your first order of hair loss treatment. That's keeps.com/Steve Reviews. Thank you for listening, guys. Now back to the review. The film starts off by telling us the legendary tale of Kron and how he originally freed humanity from their demon overlords. During this battle, Kron suffered a fatal wound and died 7 days later, and the people drank his blood in order to gain his powers, which includes his dick apparently. I gotta say though, it's a pretty strong opening for the film. The animation is looking nice, the gore is looking goresome, and I even like the visual of Kron dying in his victory pose. We cut to present day, which for us is technically the past, where we see the descendants of Kron's blood drinkers, the Barbarians, a powerful tribe of warrior people who pride themselves on getting drunk, crushing their enemies, and not being all too smart. We then get introduced to our main character, Ronald, who, yep, you've guessed it, isn't at all like the other barbarians because he's weak, cynical, and doesn't enjoy fighting at all. Yeah, it's pretty much the opening premise of How to Train Your Dragon. Ronald doesn't have any parents as they have said to have died in the past, and so is raised by his uncle.
I'll just shut up and train, idiot!
One night the barbarians are all celebrating the anniversary death of Kron, and so a huge party is underway. Ronald is getting bullied by the other barbarians, so leaves the party and volunteers to take watch duty for the night. Of course, it would be this very night for the first time in years that the barbarians come under attack. And of course, Ronald wouldn't have the lung capacity to sound the warning alarm. During the attack, the barbarians are overrun and captured, except for Ronald, who by sheer luck manages to survive. Unfortunately, however, the same can't be said for his uncle, and in his dying breath, he tells Ronald that he needs to head out and find the Oracle,
The Oracle?
who will be able to give him information on how to save the other barbarians. Along his journey, he is joined by Alibert, who was one of the singers at the barbarian party. I'm not gonna lie, I think Alibert is one of the weaker elements in this film. His character is just loud and annoying.
We're gonna rock! Woo! But all the horny girls will say, Alibert, you're so sexy!
The two come across the Oracle.
Alright, that's it. I'm done shitting. I get the wipe. Go easy on my goddamn hemorrhoids.
Who tells them about the warriors who took the barbarians. Turns out that they're led by a guy called Lord Volkasar, who seeks to become ruler of the lands, and the only way to defeat Lord Volkasar is to find Kron's legendary sword. Along the way, they then meet Zandra, a strong female warrior who needs someone to defeat her in a duel so she can marry them. The problem is, she's always too strong for anyone that duels her, so she agrees to help rescue the barbarians in the hope that one of them will be able to defeat her. The trio enter a pub in order to find a guide who could lead them to Kron's sword. And is that guy caressing a goat? They meet an elf named Elric,
The voice of the wind is a light in the evening sun.
who I honestly think is my favourite character in the film. He's just so animated and flamboyant, and there's just so much gay euphemism around him.
Let me penetrate your aura. Why?
Plus I also think he gets the best one-liners.
My elf soul senses that it is far, far. Isn't that it? Fairly close by. Destiny is on our side.
Our heroes enter into the Elf Kingdom, where they need to get information from a book which can tell them where to find Kron's sword. The elves aren't too keen to let our heroes in, and so they need to figure out a way to sneak past the guards, in what is arguably the most ridiculous scene in the film, where Ronald uses an invisibility potion on himself, but there isn't quite enough of it to cover his entire body. And what part of his body do you think he was unable to cover? That's right, his groin. And so we then get an entire segment where Ronald is sneaking around the castle, and all we see is his bouncing ballsack. It is such a stupid, ridiculous moment, yet for some reason, I absolutely love it. It just feels so ludicrous and unnecessary, but it works. And I love to think of the animators that spent days, maybe even weeks, to perfect these bouncing nutsack physics. Oh, and throughout part of the scene, they also play the Nutcracker song. Perfection. And Christ, look at this elf statue. There is really no subtlety in this film. Ronald manages to get the information from the book, and after a close shave, escapes the elf castle. The celebrations don't last long, however, as Volkasar's men manage to track down Ronald. Ronald and Alibert manage to escape, but Sandra is captured. Before they can go out to rescue her, Ronald and Alibert get captured by a tribe of Amazon women. And I must admit, after spending much of the film looking at ballsacks and barbarian arse, this is a welcome change of scene. The tribe has no men amongst them, so want to use Ronald and Alibert to help populate the next generation. Yeah, it's basically like the Snoo Snoo episode from Futurama.
You mean snoo snoo?
However, unlike the Futurama episode, this one has a bit of a weirder vibe to it. Because whereas in the Futurama episode, Fry and Zap were up for the Snoo Snoo, Ronald here really isn't, but has to go along with it anyway, so effectively gets raped, and the film just plays it all up for laughs. Like, haha, look, he was forced to have sex against his will. Meanwhile, back at Volkasar's lair, Zandra attempts to defeat Volkasar, but he ends up besting her, which now in accordance to her tribe's tradition, means that she must now marry him and obeys every command. After escaping the Amazon tribe, Ronald eventually manages to find Kron's sword, but who else should also be there? But Sandra. Ronald was captured and taken to Lord Volkasar's lair, where Volkasar needs the blood of every descendant from Kron in order to become a demon god just like the one Kron originally defeated. Though technically he doesn't have the blood of every descendant, as Ronald's uncle died earlier on in the film, but whatever. Through dumb luck, Ronald manages to free the other barbarians, but unfortunately it's too late, as Volkasar manages to drink the blood and transform into the demon.
The sounds of terror will rise towards the sky!
Christ, he looks just like the devil from Fantasia. Or not. They discover that the demon needs to be Asia. Or not. They discover that the demon needs to be stabbed through the forehead, just as Kron originally did at the start of the film. Ronald initially attempts this, and fails. But with the combined effort of the other barbarians and Zandra, Ronald succeeds, to which nothing happens? Interesting subversion of our expectations. I wonder where this is gonna go. Oh wait, never mind. Ronald and Sandra declare their love for each other.
We don't have to fight a duel now, do we?
No. You've already conquered my heart, Ronald.
Where the barbarians return home and we get celebrations. Alibert impressing the ladies, more gay euphemisms, and one of the best closing lines to any film.
Fucking barbarians!
And that's Ronald the Barbarian. A completely ludicrous film which isn't afraid to go balls to the wall. And I honestly enjoyed it a lot more than I was anticipating. It has a lot of low-grade toilet humor and ball-kicking jokes that I was actually expecting to roll my eyes at. But I think because the film just fully embraces its insanity, you can't help but laugh along with it. The film's plot is designed to be a parody of the fantasy quest style genre, with it
You know, Xbox.